So most likely the ethnographic present would be
probably from the 19th century, late 19th century. Most of the ethnographic present in the United States is from the 1880s, when there was mass immigration from Europe and East Asia, and industrialization took place. And we have, through the 20th century, those immigrants and the children of those immigrants. And then from the second half of the 20th century, you have people like me coming up who are learning from grandparents and parents up to the present time, that constitutes a knowledge base that I use in daily life. So for the cultures in Taiwan, we would also say, like through the 19th century, early 20th century, we start to have the collective consciousness of a people and what they know and understand. And it's, of course, quite interesting in Taiwan that indigenous people were continued their, let's say, headhunting and beliefs into the 20th century. But from the mid-20th century onwards, there was a shift in what they could do or not do. And also, for all of the people in Taiwan, there were several dramatic shifts. So from the end of the 19th century, we have the end of the Qing dynasty and its hold or gradual decay, including in China, and the prominence of Japan using its infrastructure modernization. And that's what we had a glimpse of at the Hot Springs Museum. Everything the Japanese did, and there was a film. Did you notice the film? That was being played, black and white movie at the museum. It showed how proud the Japanese were to have Taiwan as its jewel of the empire. And Japan built up the railroad, places like the Hot Springs Museum, the infrastructure of society, of government, of law and order, developing colleges for medicine and law, National Taiwan University, eventually the campus from 1927, the parks, places of recreation, and also in the film you see there is respect, or at least interest, in the indigenous people, as long as they were not headhunting. They were passive and becoming acculturated into Japanese society. Then suddenly, with a dramatic end to the Japanese, in 1945 we have a completely new government, not the Qing dynasty, but a republican government moving into Taiwan, and it had gone through 50 years of turmoil and revolution, and from decay, trying modernization, then fighting a war against Japan, and exhausted, coming in to rule Taiwan. And you have that legacy up through the 1980s, when after about 40 years of martial law, it was lifted and Taiwan became a free and democratic society. And this is probably where most of my students come in, who were born probably in the 80s or 90s, and they've only known freedom and liberalization, and they think about war and martial law as some kind of dark period in the past, but certainly the collective memory of their parents and grandparents. So that has somehow crept into the consciousness of today's young people, although it's not a prominent aspect it has come in as a warning to be more conservative, think about the society holistically, be conscious of the environment, and know who you are and where you are living in Taiwan. The film we're about to see is done by a Hakka from Sinju, and when he was in his 20s, I suppose I met him in 95 in Dulan. It's the Amis village just outside of the city of Taidong. And it's at a very important and sacred site, megalithic site, Neolithic culture, and built on that there is the community called Atulan in their language, which means atoll. And it's believed that even this Austronesian word atoll has originated from this village, which is built on a rock pile, as they say. And an atoll is a rock pile in the ocean. And this is right on the ocean front. And their tradition is recalled in the film for its meaning. What is the meaning of tradition? So Futuru, he got adopted by the Dulan Amis, and he became a member of an age-set group that came of age and initiated with them, and then became a member of their society, and then became from Sinju a frequent visitor. Now you have to remember that most indigenous people, about half of the population, works outside their village. They might go to Geelong or Taipei or Kaohsiung to work in construction or at the harbor, and they come back for certain occasions, and sometimes they're regular commuters. So Futuru, this is his Amis name, he took up this kind of commuting Amis aspect of living in Sinju, becoming a doctoral student in anthropology at Tsinghua University, and frequenting down to his adopted village, and made this movie. Yes.
This is Dula, remember?
Yes.
In Taiwan.
Yes.
Near to Taiwan.
Yeah. And this village, a very attractive place. It's now becoming an artist community. Foreigners are now settling there, surfers, people who practice the arts find it very attractive place. It's on these white cliffs over the ocean, and behind there's a sacred mountain of Dulan. And it's such a pretty and perfect climate there. It's tropical, balmy, and yet with a nice breeze, never too hot. And it's really a nice place to live. So very attractive. And what the movie is about, the film depicts how these age-set groups are given their name based on some occasion or happening of prominence that will be important for their name, as they will then take their name and their age-set group members all the way through the end of their lifetime, of which they practice their song, their manner of dance, and how they view the world from their initiation through the different stages of life as a collective membership, as an age-set group. So what is interesting in this interpretation of tradition is that each group, they try to outdo their elders, the people who came before them. And so this group, they decided to adapt something that occurred in Taidong. There was an exhibition from West Africa, and they got to know the culture of Senegal and their music. and of course American hip-hop, Hindi, Bollywood, film, music. All they got thought it was modern and cool and incorporated into their dance style. And that is what we call tradition. So when they're in their 80s, they're still going to be dancing to that music and holding up their part of the tradition that is called Amis. But certainly this whole idea of tradition becomes eclectic. It's borrowed. It comes from other cultures, and it changes. But yet, because it looks older in some way, we call it tradition. Second film about the Dulan people remembering the Second World War. And they were enlisted to fight with Japan in New Guinea. And he heard the stories from the person who went to New Guinea to fight against the Americans and Australians, and followed the route and went to the battlefields and took this guy's son and grandson to go back to New Guinea and find all the places in his stories. So he's narrating his wartime experience, and then he went there to the places, and there were still armored vehicles, tanks, shells, weapons, wrecked planes, still all of that scattered around there. And his third film is on this flood that happened 2 years ago on August 8th in Pingdong. And he was also the director of the last ethnographic film festival that took place in Taipei. And he is now teaching in Taidong at Taidong National University. He's teaching the craft of doing ethnographic film. Yes. So essentially the filmmaker is living out his dream. So when we met up, I went there because I was doing a study of the Amis language at Dulan, and I needed some textbooks, children's books about learning the language, and happened to meet him there. And then he just stayed on there and stayed more and did more with the people. So whenever there's a special event or something happening, he just gets in his car and he drives down there and stays for the event and everything, and then he gets back to Sinju for his family, and his wife is a school teacher there in Sinju, and now she's trying to transfer to Taidong because now he has a job there.
I think it's really interesting the fact that they brought up their ethnographic present as a evolving one incorporated modern day. Like a lot of times when you see traditions, they're like, oh, it's just the way we do it. It's because it came from this. That's not necessarily useful anymore. And they're like, no, we're evolving per generation, which is interesting to say.
So Futuru, he received at the American Anthropological Film Screenings an award, and his paper. I'm passing around his paper that is to revisit the meaning of tradition, what it means in terms of anthropology, and how it has been incorporated now into the modernization process. Okay, this is actually part of the theme of a book that I'm producing. It should be very out soon before the election. It's called Taiwan Since Martial Law: Society, Culture, Politics, Economy. It's getting to be about 700 pages. and 19 chapters. And it is written by authors coming from Belgium, Germany, from Japan, the UK, Australia, the US, Chile, Spain. There's so many various perspectives of information of authors coming from different fields, backgrounds, nationalities, all looking at what has happened in Taiwan since 1987. And in 1987, I happened to be here and teaching at National Taiwan University, and my students said, "Come quickly, let's go and join the march." And march where? Well, yes, up the mountain. So we were marching up to Yamingshan to the National Assembly. The National Assembly was an instrument of state designed to elect the president every 6 years. And they had been themselves elected in Nanjing in 1947 and had come to Taiwan with the government in 49. And as National Assemblymen, they convened every 6 years to elect president and plan for the reconstruction of China once they returned to the mainland. So people in Taiwan thought everything that they brought with them and their institutions were outdated. And so the protest was to go to the National Assembly, to their gate, and protest. Before we could get there, the government decided that it would be too embarrassing for those elder guys to be protested against. They were so senior, and simply the government called the protesters to say, "You can go home now, we're going to lift martial law." And that happened. And I was so surprised, we couldn't even get there, we just, it was already done. And everything in Taiwan started transforming into a cultural renaissance for language, appreciation of being Taiwanese, for the institutions, developing Hakka culture, and for the contesting of other parties from, there was just the KMT and Deng Huai, the people outside the party. So then the Democratic Progressive Party was formed and started to contest and got seats in the legislature. And then finally in 2000, then Chen Shui-bian was elected the first opposition leader for 2 terms as president until 2008. And then the KMT came back in 2008 and has ruled until now, and is being again contested by not only the Democratic Progressive Party, but also the People's First Party, led by James Song, and he did that in 2000. He contested with his own party against the KMT, and the KMT then could not win, and the Democratic Progressive Party came in terms of the most votes. So now we have a democracy where we have a ruling party going for elections, losing for 2 terms, and then that party again regaining the presidency. And now what's very interesting, on January 14th, people will go to the polls again and to see what's going to happen if the KMT will get another 4 years with Ma Ying-jeou, or there will be another in the office of president. And for many people in Taiwan, there is a kind of nostalgia, not because martial law offered anything good, but at least for the people, especially those who came from the mainland, it offered stability. The NT dollar was 39 to the US dollar, and it was unchanged for 40 years. So people doing business in Taiwan, they were assured of the rate of exchange. And it was a very friendly rate of exchange. It made the goods affordable out of Taiwan, trading out. And once the NT dollar was deregulated, it went from 39 down to 27 NT dollars to the US dollar. And then there were great fluctuations. Now it has stabilized around 29 to 32 NT dollars to the US dollar. It has found a sort of a common ground for what is the worth of the NT dollar in terms of its value, and for trade, and for the economy in Taiwan that has now become more mature and stabilized. Whereas before, in the 70s and 80s, it was up to 15-16% growth in Taiwan. It was a wild economy, and now it has stabilized. It's still a high growth economy compared to many Western countries. And low unemployment, I think it's about 4%, compared to many countries that are 10, 15, 20% unemployment. So Taiwan's stability, its economy has done quite well, its performance. And then, as you know, most people, when they think of Taiwan, it's concern about China and cross-strait relations. And this is another amazing story, how Taiwan has kept its dance going with China since 1949, not ever surrendering to the Civil War, and still maintaining the government that was established in China from the time of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, now 100 years, and celebrating more years to come. So I would like to now have some discussion, and then we will move into our time for our groups to plan out what they're going to do for their presentations. Now that we're in our present state and knowing very much about where Taiwan and its people have come from, and facing the big neighbor, China, and yet the government has been able to maintain itself without ever admitting losing the Civil War, and ongoing in its current position. And what are your thoughts? Because eventually, when you take any studies about Taiwan, the question will come up about cross-strait relations. And what does that mean?
I do think it's really an interesting situation, and I think it's really, I've thought about it before in the sense of, living in Taiwan, before you come to Taiwan, you with a lot of people, at least American, a lot of my friends certainly know anything about Taiwan, and a lot of people presume it's part of China, really similar to China, and then when you look and you realize it's so different, and the people are so different, and it seems like you say the government seems so distant, it seems so set up, and it's quite an independent way, and yet there still is this issue of the cross-strait relations, and it still is kind of a negotiation. And I think the most interesting thing is how hard, I don't know, I've thought about trying to predict or think kind of where it will lead, because I've heard arguments towards getting closer, bettering the relations, bettering the class-straight relations, and arguments towards keeping the independence, keeping kind of a distance to keep independence. And they both have pros and cons, and I don't know. I think it's interesting because it seems very specific situation, and I have no clue what will happen with the situation in the next 20, 30 years.
Well, Taiwan is an independent republic of China,
Yeah.
and it has been since 1911, with or without Taiwan, as a government.
Yeah. So what does that say for the people?
That's right. That's the
So
question.
that's the big, yeah. I mean, as far as I'm
Because-
concerned, they're completely independent.
Well, the people have changed because with the formation of the republic in 1911,
Yeah.
it did not include Taiwan, and Taiwan was under Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 1945, what is called retrocession of Taiwan. That means Taiwan has returned to China, but actually it was removed from China under the Qing dynasty. And then the People's Republic of China, it was formed in 1949. And its claim to Taiwan is because of the Republic of China claiming it and the Qing dynasty that relinquished its claim. So the claims are fuzzy at best. The people have been living an independent life. I was at the first debate between the KMT and the Democratic Progressive Party, and it was becoming a legal issue for that party to exist. And so they didn't want to show that the KMT was actually going to stoop to debate with this fledgling party. And so the debate was held at the Bankers Club on the condition that it would be in English, so that it would not reach the Chinese press. Yes. Yes. And what essentially the KMT debater said was that it was actually the KMT that has kept Taiwan independent since 1949. And then the people did not suffer from China because of the KMT. And it was the mandate of the KMT to continue keeping Taiwan and its people independent. And the Democratic Progressive Party debater was astonished because that was the whole idea of an independent Taiwan. And yet it was the claim of the KMT that it made Taiwan independent.
But in the sense of the KMT relocating here and the U.S. moving ships into the Taiwan Straits and stopping China from coming over here in a way, I mean, it's not completely accurate, but it's not far-fetched as well. I mean, obviously they're turning it for political purposes,
Sure,
but
sure.
I mean, in a way, it does also have some
To win the debate.
little bit of validity. But I mean, China did have plans on coming here, and if the U.S. hadn't have moved ships, into the Straits, then they probably would have. So, yeah, in the 50s. So, I mean, there is some claim to that. Some truth to that. Whether, I mean, they weren't, but I think it falls apart when they weren't trying to make an independent Taiwan. I mean, they were here to.
All right, so technically, if you look at the Constitution of the Republic of China, it claims not only all of China, but Mongolia. And when I first came to Taiwan, if I had an atlas, it would be open, they would turn to the page at immigration, and would see, look, you have an atlas that says People's Republic of China, and right handy they had a big rubber stamp that said the Republic of China, and they would stamp it right on China, and then they would say, And Mongolia is trying to get away and stamping on Mongolia. People's Republic of China would have been erased off anything that entered this country. And when I first went to China, I was very politely asked, are you going to visit Taiwan? And I said, yes. And then he said, then I won't stamp your passport. But I will put a leaf of paper in your passport and stamp that, and you just keep that tucked away and take it out when you leave China. Because if you have a PRC stamp in your passport, then they won't allow you to enter Taiwan. So there's a lot of, and then of course the big change came in all of my years here, that finally you can take a direct flight. And I did. I went to Xiamen, and I went to Beijing, and it just takes off from Taiwan and goes directly to China. And so these are the really big changes. And tourists from China, of course, I live in Hualien now. There's everywhere Chinese tourists coming over and visiting. That was all forbidden before. So the big attraction is the place forbidden is now completely open for Chinese to visit. Well, China is using the Hong Kong model because obviously in Taiwan, as in Hong Kong, there is private ownership. And for China, there is no private ownership. All the things in China belongs to the people. And you can lease it. You can get a 100-year, 99-year lease on something. You can invest in things in China. It looks like ownership, but it's not the same style of ownership that you find in Taiwan. And all the laws are different in Taiwan, and all the security laws, and all the economic conditions, and everything in Taiwan is so different. So, in fact, Taiwan would have to be ruled as an autonomous region, basically offering Taiwan its democracy under the flag of China as an experiment for China, maybe for China's future, because China also claims that it's a democracy. And even more so under martial law, when there was only the KMT and it outlawed all other parties. The Communist Party of China never outlawed other opposition parties. Of course, they didn't allow them to win anything. But still, the KMT is a registered political party in China, as it was organized from the 1910s or 20s when it went to every province and became a political office. And all these offices have been kept there in China since that time, and actually sponsored by the government to keep them going. Again, obviously they don't have. So if the KMT ever decided to return to China, they would be welcomed. They get their offices back, and they could operate as an opposition party in China. But what power would they have, since they have most of the power in Taiwan? What power would they have to oppose the Communist Party? And they would become then the fledgling opposition in China. I had an unusual experience. I took the delegation of the Ministry of Education to Mexico to visit the Museum of Man, the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. And we got our visas from Phoenix, Arizona, and got on the plane, went to Mexico City, and as we were going through immigration, about half of the people with their passports that said Republic of China on it went through, and then some official declared, he said, wait, these people are from Taiwan. He thought they were having people come from the People's Republic of China. And then we have half of them in, have gone through, and half of them waiting outside. And so I told them, I said, look, we all have visas issued by your ministry in Phoenix, giving us all visas as an official tour to look at your Museum of Anthropology here in Mexico City. And it's greatly admired, and we're building a National Museum of Prehistory in Taiwan, and we're going to use your museum as a model for what we're doing there. And now we have half the people, these are ministry officials, half of them are in your country and half are waiting in line to come in. What are you going to do? And they had to huddle and think about it, and then they realized, because actually they have issued visas, signed, forms and everything from the Minister of Foreign Affairs with his signature that I happened to get in Phoenix for them. And also the curator of the Museum of Anthropology put pressure on the foreign ministry to make sure that they all got visas. And they couldn't deny the official visa signed giving permission to enter. And then they felt embarrassed that they had made a mistake from the beginning, thinking that they were coming from the PRC, and quickly got them all in.
Why is it a problem that if they had thought originally, they had originally realized that they weren't from the PRC, they wouldn't have issued the visa?
And the same thing happened when I took the Amis, the people from Taidong. I got them to perform in Belarus. And to get their visas, they could not get it any place except at an office in Vienna. And that office in Vienna is shared by the office with Russia. And there was one guy happened to be friendly with Taiwanese, and he would be there on a Saturday. And I rushed in with all the passports, and he gave everyone their visa in Vienna. And we got back on the plane, and we arrived in Belarus. And we were going again through, and all the people from the university who were coming to receive us were waiting on the other side, waving to us, and they had come to Taiwan for the International Folklife Festival, and they invited us to go to their country. And again, halfway through, they realized that these were Taiwan passports. But then they had the university people on the other side of the gate clamoring and waving, and we're waving to them, and they realized that this had to be settled. They had to get them all through. And it appeared in the newspaper that this was an incident, how Taiwanese got in to their country when that should not have happened, blaming it on a Professor David Blundell.
Where came the idea from going to Belarus? Because you see, like in Belarus, there's totally opposite situation in Taiwan, because Taiwan tries to be independent, and in Belarus there is still a regime. So I mean, how does it work together? How they let you go in?
Okay, in this newspaper article, it was quite interesting because there was actually, they voted that they would not allow or honor the ROC passport to their country, but that was a vote in their legislature. But already they had a Taiwan office in their country. And then the question was in this article, and then how does the Taiwan representative then use his passport to enter the country? In the same article. And then of course we went to the Taiwan Cultural and Economic Office to express our happiness that there was a Taiwan office there and everything. And then he was complaining about his situation. He said, here I'm in a country and I can't come and go, I can't leave because they don't honor my passport, but yet I'm here. This was in '98, I think. But I've seen miracles happen. I happened to be in Moscow, staying at the Hotel Ukraine. On the last days of the Soviet Union, there was only one Soviet flag flying over the Kremlin. And there was this guy by the name of Yeltsin. He was holding like a gathering of Russians at a place called the White House. It was across the river. And I'm looking out my window and I'm seeing all this commotion going, and Yeltsin, he gets on this tank and he's waving the Russian flag, and I look at my TV and there's the same picture on CNN. And I look out my window and I look up there and look over there, there's the CNN people with their cameras in the same hotel. From the same vantage point, sitting there. The shot of this protest going on. And Russia, got out of the Soviet Union. I mean, I have no idea what the government was thinking as a communist party, like the KMT or any of these parties, that they're trying to hold their political power, and yet, as in the case of Gorbachev, I mean, he was the premier of the Soviet Union. He put himself out of a job by dissolving the Soviet Union and his own position. And then Yeltsin came in and operated out of the Kremlin. There is a similar notion, a scenario about China in the same sort of future of its, not being the People's Republic of China because of the corruption that exists in China, like as it did in the Soviet Union. In terms of, in China, there is a system of cadre. And the cadre are like chiefs throughout China, following the principles and the authority of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. But in fact, the cadre are looking after their own situation and their own families, and they become wealthy people. And they're about 2% of the population that's become exceedingly wealthy in the name of communism in China. And it's for the benefit of their personal families, and not for the infrastructure and the solidarity of China. So there is a scenario that is being now looked upon as what happened with the Soviet Union for China. But of course the Chinese say that'll never happen to us. What about Jingmen? It's just 2 miles off of Xiamen. And in the 50s, of course, China did everything that it could to occupy that island. And it wasn't the Sixth Fleet that prevented the occupation. It was the fortitude of the people to defend Taiwan. And still all of the parts of the integrity of the ROC since the 50s, all these small islands and very close to China, they're all holding their integrity. So how does that happen? It's a kind of
Is that just political pressure, or is that
the status quo of mutual respect, in a way, of honoring each other's territory and not even trying to invade the other anymore. And then there was an article in a Chinese newspaper that said, since the people of Taiwan were not frightened by the intent of this missile test over Taiwan, and it was so expensive to do that, to frighten the people, and they were not frightened, they should pay for it. Yeah. send the Taiwanese the bill for this test. That and then I thought, oh, if China is so worried about the expense for the test, then how would they pay for the invasion? This is the clinical operation failed. Well, combating communism is still a part of the U.S. Senate and Congress, by the way. It hasn't disappeared from U.S. politics. It's actually embedded in what is called the Taiwan Relations Act that has nothing to do with the Taiwanese. It was an act of the U.S. Congress to make it into U.S. law that the U.S. is responsible if it's going to move its embassy from Taipei to Beijing to forever protect and maintain the people of Taiwan for their democratic future. And of course, any law needs to be implemented. And if the U.S. decides to implement that law, it will depend if the U.S. feels that Taiwan is threatened. And so far, with, as you mentioned, this chess game that is played, Taiwan has not been threatened directly since the 50s and has maintained a status quo for over 60 years, keeping a balance for the people. So for 60 years, that's a complete lifetime, a generation of people who have only known living in Taiwan in their own way and having nothing to do with China. On the other hand, there are about 2 million Taiwanese doing business in China, and it's said that much of the Chinese economy is controlled by Taiwanese businessmen. Some of the largest factories that are employing several, hundreds of thousands of Chinese employees are companies owned by Taiwanese. And so you have this complete interactive economic balance going on, and yet politically separate. Well, I believe now Taiwan's significance is that it plays a role as a thorn in China somehow that the U.S. can play. It's no longer the great ROC ally, but a player in East Asia. And what Taiwan does provide is that China would like to have a deep blue water ocean navy. Russia has theirs out of Vladivostok, but for China it is hemmed in through Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and then the U.S. is sitting out in Guam in the deep ocean patrolling, and also its bases in Okinawa. So the U.S. has bases on the two tiers of islands that are potentially where China is going, and feels that it's still being constricted by the U.S. Many of the people who are Taiwanese in the 60s who left Taiwan, they were being blacklisted, and they got high positions in government and professorships, and as you mentioned, served as a very important lobby for the rights of the people of Taiwan, and that has been, going on for more than 50 years. So the U.S. really certainly has a position. Of course, then comparing Taiwan with China's human rights and China's democracy and China's anything, the U.S. will always favor now what Taiwan is doing as a modern state with democratic principles.
You said earlier, I remember in the semester, there's something about dominating and proving. It was whoever had the political will dominate and enforce their ideals and history and stuff. So, and what we talked about with the U.S. and stuff, there's obviously no benefit for Taiwan pretty much going back to China. There's no benefit for the United States. There's no benefit for Japan, probably, or South Korea. So, I mean, it's definitely going to be on an international scale. I'd say in the next, I thought it'd be in 20 years. I was in China this past summer, and I hadn't been there for about 4 or 5 years, but I mean, the food price there has gone up like 30, 40%, with the housing, and it seems like a lot of people had a lot more angst against the government and a lot of issues, and there's people on strike there now at auto factories, and I'd say within 10 years there's going to be some pretty big issues. I think everything's going to start to slow down, and I'd say even they're economically the same as the U.S. Their military is still way behind, but obviously that will catch up in only 20 years. So, yeah, from a military point of view, obviously the U.S. would not want to give up Taiwan, and like I said, obviously Japan doesn't either. They don't want China even closer in that respect. So, I definitely say, you know, just how like he mentioned, that was interesting. They did think communism was like 1,000 years. Like, people really thought it was going to be forever. I've read that. And, you know, in 22, 23 years, it totally changed. I wouldn't be surprised if I was sitting here 10 years from now. I'm like, I can't believe that, you know. I mean, the U.S. economy's going down. We could get someone more conservative than Bush. Taiwan can be used as like a proxy war in a bigger conflict with China in the region. The U.S. is pulling out of the Middle East now and Afghanistan. So it's just like, when's that big next war going to happen, you almost think? I mean, I wouldn't be that pessimistic, but, I mean, think about it. Like seriously, like 10, 20 years, like, no, we don't think there's not going to be any conflict with the world human population getting to ridiculous amounts, water shortages, pollution. I mean, it's mainly because of world population, besides any political aspect. World population is like, I think stuff's going to probably hit the fan a lot sooner than you think. I'd say maybe 10, 15 years. It's going to be some big issues in a lot of areas. So I'm always for like just like crazy war. I like that. Like, just not a simple solution like people talking. Nuclear holocaust. That's what I think is going to happen. What do you think, Paul?
Dr. Strangelove.
Okay. How about your ready enough? You ready? I didn't forget you.
I get asked by Taiwanese people a lot what I think of this issue. And I sort of think that I really shouldn't, like, I can't decide, you know, like, where I am. I kind of feel like I should just observe. And because it's a very emotional issue. Like, Taiwanese politics in general is more about emotion than policy, like a lot of times. And I don't share those emotions, so I can't really completely understand this issue, I feel like. And the way I see it, like, a lot of times people think of China as wanting Taiwan in like a childish manner, like they want it just because, well, it's just ours, and like there wouldn't be a deeper reason than that. And the way I see it, like, China might not actually care about Taiwan in a way that most people seem to think. I think Taiwan is just a symbol for China in the way that, how should I explain this? If you look at Chinese history, there's always, like, the Chinese people aren't just, they're not one group of people. There's so many minorities and like there's so many different kinds of people there. And there's always been war, like throughout history in China, because they've been divided. And the first emperor that united China over there is seen, they see him like a really, really important figure, and they praise him as like the guy that united China. And the way I see it, the way I think they see it is, if you want to have peace when you have more than 1 billion people, either you can let them divide and like fight amongst themselves until there's people are tired of fighting or something and there's naturally peace, or you unite them and you impose this identity that they all share and have in common, so that they start to think that they're one group, and that by doing that, then there's less likely that they're gonna fight amongst themselves. And I think they see Taiwan as a symbol for this. Like, because I think they're kind of fine with Taiwan like keeping the status quo. It's just that if they would give Taiwan independence, then that would kind of dissolve all of that unification they've done already over there, and that would mean like people that might have some historical claims over there say, well, you let them be independent, how about us? And then there's going to be like more and more uprisings over there. And I think that's the whole thing for them. I don't think it's I think it's just that symbol that they can't give Taiwan independence just because there's so many different kinds of people in China, and that would, I think, just would lead to a lot of uprisings in China. And I think that's, yeah, my idea on that.
Most of my students, they don't see unification happening even within their lifetime. And no one has mentioned the status of the National Palace Museum, or in effect the government that fled in 1949 with all trappings of government, Hong Kong Treaty, all manuscripts from every dynasty of China, of legal issues, of the whole archive of China came with the government in 1949, and that's in Taipei. So the dilemma is not only over the issue of Taiwan, it's over who owns all of the national archives of China. It's now in Taipei.
It's like a messy divorce. It's like, this is my dish, this is your dish.
Yeah, well, it's more than that, because it's the National Palace Museum is everything priceless out of China, nothing related to Taiwan, and the collection of the emperors and some archaeology in China. And eventually that has to be dealt with in terms of repatriation, or if you don't unify the government with China, that means the ROC government with China, then you have to figure out a way so that the government, that is the ROC, is repatriated with all of its trappings of state and documents and treasures to China. So this is also on the dilemma, and what is also holding back any force of violence is that because all these treasures are in the balance. It's a delicate thing that when you want things returned, including, the government that has fled in 1949 to peacefully return everything or occupy it peacefully. So actually there is no violence in the equation, although there's a lot of talk about it. To unify China, the communists were so brutal. I mean, they took out all the landlords, the rich peasants, and they classified people about who should be eliminated and did so systematically. And I mean, it was just a huge brutality to unify China. I mean, and that's what people in Taiwan are afraid, never to be under that system. So that system, as it exists, probably won't happen in Taiwan. And so the whole mainland, the whole scenario is that the mainland system has to change to be friendlier to people and to face up to its own history, its own brutality, and have democratic ideals in not only in principle but working in China. So that will take a very long time, or even a short time, but there has to be a change somewhere in terms of the status quo to change.